For this past week, I've been playing a ton of Wild Hearts, and I'm happy to say it's really good. I don't know if this is going to be a replacement for Monster Hunter. In fact, I'm pretty sure it isn't, but it is absolutely one of the best alternatives in the genre that I've ever played. While in some ways the game does feel a bit less polished with a world that's not quite as fleshed out, it is nevertheless having enough of its own charm, unique features, and it absolutely nails the most important parts to me, which is the combat and gameplay loop. Overall, I would say that Wild Hearts has its own thing going for it. From the boss types to the weapons, and in particular the Karakuri contraptions, which open up a ton of interesting twist to gameplay, all of which give this game its own unique flair that I've really enjoyed. At this point, I've played about 40 hours of Wild Hearts, and while I've made my way through the main campaign, there is still quite clearly a lot left to do. I've just unlocked the end game boss hunt variants. I've only recently started making blue and purple weapons with an entire rarity tier still above that. I haven't even unlocked all of the Karakuri variations, and there is still plenty of monster armor sets for me to make for both cosmetic but also for power gains. All in all, yes, I have really enjoyed my time with Wild Hearts. I think it's a good game. So now I want to talk with you about it and give you kind of a general overview of what is Wild Hearts like and what is there to do. Now, the formula is simple and true to its inspiration. You go out on hunts, take down bosses, collect their parts, which, along with some various resources you'll find in these zones, you will use to craft weapons and gear. This makes you stronger, giving you more damage, armor, and resistance, which will in turn make you have an easier time when taking on the next challenging boss. Rinse and repeat. Now, Wild Hearts does have a narrative campaign, which acts as an introduction to the boss's zones, the major town, as well as various NPCs. Although longtime viewers of my channel will probably know this is not what I come to loot games for, and for the most part, I feel like any dialogue or cutscenes are just taking time away from what I enjoy doing, which is playing the game, so I skip most all of it whenever it is possible, which it was in this game. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of thoroughly detailed critiques of the game's story, but you'll have to find that elsewhere because I simply don't care. It's just how I play these kind of games. So what does that entail? Well, again, it entails hunting bosses, going through the main campaign, which will introduce you to the various kimono, which is the name for the bosses in Wild Hearts. It takes you through them one at a time, and every time you defeat one for the first time, you will then unlock a hunt for that particular boss, and it kind of functions like you expect. You'll be given a set challenge to take out one of the particular kimono. This will reward you with resources that drop from the boss after you kill it, but also a set number of resources for that particular repeatable hunt. Now, for release, they have said there are going to be about 20 of these bosses in the game. Everyone is some sort of a fusion of animal with natural elements like plants, trees, and rocks. So for example, the first boss you come across is Ragetail. It's a rat who's covered with flowers and has this big floral thing on the tip of its tail. Or there's Sap Scourge, this kind of beaver looking creature with antlers that's also covered in wood and ferns. And the first large boss you come across, King Tusk, is this very oversized boar covered with moss and rocks. All of the other bosses in the game are similarly a combination of an animal with elements. Now, just like Monster Hunter, every single boss will have its own unique moveset, and through trial and error, you will eventually learn the various animations, how to best avoid damage, and then when to capitalize on downtime, which happens in between certain attacks. Every boss will have some sort of an enrage effect as well. At a certain point in the fight, this will trigger, usually with some big flashy animation, like Ragetail summons this massive tree right where he is, and then he gets all glowy, and then after which point they become a bit more dangerous. They're more powerful with enhanced versions of their attacks, and they even unlock new attacks as well while in this enrage period. The bosses will have specific weaknesses as well, so there will be parts of their body that are easier to damage, and then there will also be certain attributes, attack types, and ailments that are particularly effective against each of the bosses. There's an in-game encyclopedia which will spell all of this out for you, letting you see, for example, that Lavaback has a soft head, is particularly weak to water, slash attacks, as well as poison, and this sort of chart is available for every one of the bosses in the game. There's also enhanced versions of these which come in what are basically considered endgame, and those will include new move sets as well as damage types. And then after defeating any one of the bosses, you're able to see a list of their various parts and where to attack on their body to get particular pieces that you might need for some of the gear that you want to craft. So yes, outside of the main campaign, which will kind of guide you through the path, you're just repeating hunts, you're going out, you're farming the bosses to get the resources you need to make your gear. But before we talk about the gear and the crafting and some of the other stuff, let me touch on the weapons. So there are 8 different weapons in the game currently, and each of these sort of function like a different class. They're very, very different from each other with very different playstyles and mechanics. Now, the one weapon that I have been primarily using is the Nodachi. This is a massive 2-handed sword. It's pretty slow and sluggish compared to the other weapons, but in turn, it is very heavy hitting. It's got a basic attack, which is a 3-swing combo, which has a massive recovery time at the end of that. There's also a moving attack where you can spin and move slightly forward in any direction that you're facing. But the big ability is this sheath attack, where you will hold the sword by your side, charging it up and powering it up. You can hold it in place for a quick charge, but this will root you and you won't be attacking at the time. Or you can attack and move attack, or even just walk around with it, but the charge will happen more slowly. However you choose to build it up, once this is maxed out, you can unleash it for this massive 2-hit combo, the last of which is some of the largest damage that is available from a weapon in the game. Then there's the Karakuri katana. This is actually the first weapon that the game introduces you to. It is a mid-weight, short-range blade that's fairly well balanced. You basically are working to fill up this meter while attacking, and then once full, you can unleash this unbound version of the weapon, which essentially changes it into a bladed whip with longer range and heavy damage. In addition to those, the game also has a bow, a maul, a bladed wagasa, a hand cannon, the claw blade, and the Karakuri staff, which appears to be one of the most complex weapons in the game. Now, like I said, I mostly use the Nodachi. I would say about 90% of my playtime so far has been with it. I just generally prefer with games like this to get really comfortable with one particular weapon, with one particular moveset, especially while I'm first learning the game, while I'm first learning the bosses and their mechanics. Once I get comfortable with how all of the boss fights work, then I start to kind of foray into other weapon types. But yeah, for the most part, I've just been using the Nodachi. Now, one big thing that really sets Wild Hearts apart, and at first I wasn't sure how interesting it would be, but it's turned out to be, in my opinion, one of the selling points of the game, are the Karakuri. So there are 6 basic Karakuri in the game, and each of these have their own unique function. And this is basically these contraptions that assist you in fights and that you will be constantly using and summoning. The first is the crate. This is a simple box that can just be used as a platform. You can place one of them down, jump off of it. It gives you a bit of an upward launch, and that allows you to reach higher terrain, but also can be combined with various attacks from each of the weapons for some sort of a unique attack type. Then there is the spring. This will propel you forward in any given direction. This also, like the crate, can be used and combined with attacks for special variations of those attacks. You can place down this torch, and whenever you walk next to it, it will enchant your weapon with fire for a short duration, while also unleashing a unique attack. There is the glider. This is sort of like helicopter wings that will let you glide for as far as you can reach before you hit the ground or you manually dismount. The stake is this accordion-like device. You will jump on it when it's aimed in a direction, and then this will shoot out a grapple hook, and whatever it grabs onto, it will pull you towards it and then give you a bit of a boost up. Great for like climbing on top of terrain or on top of the various bosses. And then the final basic Karakuri is the celestial anchor. It basically gives access to an air dash. This is just an insane amount of movement and just ability to hop around, to get elevation on bosses, to catch up to bosses, to get up on terrain. So each of these Karakuri will cost a set number of what are called thread to summon. So for example, the crate will cost a single thread, whereas the glider will cost 3. Now, as you play the game and you progress, you will be able to have a larger amount of maximum thread at any given time that you can carry. And the thread are a pretty abundant resource. You will find them all around the environment, and they can be gathered by mining rocks or chopping down certain certain trees, but also these will fall off of bosses during a fight. And I'll just say I've never felt like I was short on thread. They are pretty abundant. And what is so interesting about the Karakuri is just all of the potential combinations. So you can place down one of these at any point, but then you can also stack them up. So for example, you can stack up 3 of any particular Karakuri in a vertical direction. So if you get 3 crates, that gives you that extra height, and then off of that you jump even higher. Or 3 springs will give you some verticality before it springs you forward in a direction. But then also with this, there are what are known as fusion Karakuri, and this is where things get really interesting. When placing down a particular combination of multiple of one or of various types of Karakuri, it actually creates a new thing. So for example, if you stack up 6 crates, this transforms into a bulwark, which is this massive wall that can protect you from projectiles, but also will knock down any kimono who happen to run into it, opening up a window for you to deal damage. If you place down 6 torches next to each other, this creates a firework, which is used to blind flying kimono, knocking them out of the sky, opening them up for a window of damage. If you place down 3 springs, this creates a pounder, which is like a hammer that can stun kimono. If you put 3 gliders stacked up, this actually creates like this healing mist totem, which puts out this mist that will heal anyone inside of it over time. If you do spring, torch, spring, this creates a star bomb, which after a short duration or after contact with a weapon or one of the bosses will explode for massive amounts of fire damage. And these are just a few of the many combinations of these fusion Karakuri. This combination not only of the base Karakuri of stacking up crates and springs and having a glider and then doing all of these various fusions as well to create these additional items, it just adds this extra layer to combat and fighting. It just make me feel, even with slow weapons like the one that I'm using, that I'm constantly on the go, that I'm constantly able to reposition, to place down a crate, jump off of it and do a lunging attack downwards, to spring forward and do a spinning attack, to stack up some crates and then put a glider on top of it, which will then hover me in the air and allow me to get away from the boss or to reposition in a certain spot. There's just so much variation. There's so much variety and so many different things that you can do with the base Karakuri as well as their fusions, which adds such a great amount of depth to the game in addition to the weapon system. I would say that it may very well be the case that one criticism of Wild Hearts is that the weapons and the various movesets that you have access to aren't as complex or deep as what is seen in Monster Hunter, but I really do feel that the additional layer of Karakuri may very well make up for it. And we're just talking about boss fights. The Karakuri also just make world traversal that much more interesting. And there's actually one extra layer to this, because beyond the basic Karakuri as well as the Karakuri fusions, there's also what are known as Dragon Karakuri, and these are used to create these permanent world traversal. So there's this one called the Flying Vines, which it sets up this contraption which will then shoot out a zip line that you can place pretty much anywhere in the world. The game is made up of these open world zones that are fully explorable, and the zip lines allow you to get even greater traversal within that. Then there is the Wind Vortex, which will create at a particular spot this column of wind that you can use to go super far with your glider. And there's also this thing called the Roller, which summons a vehicle that allows you to move quickly on the ground. Dragon Karakuri are also used for the game's system of base building, but we'll get to that in just one moment, because first I want to talk about the open world. So Wild Heart features what we would call an open zone game. So the main campaign will take you through these 4 large, fully explorable areas, each of which are modeled after the 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. These are actually a lot bigger than I expected from the game, and beyond the edge borders of them, there are very little restrictions. In fact, as far as I can tell, there are pretty much no restrictions on where you can go within each of the zones. Pretty much anywhere is explorable as long as you can reach it. And then between there are various Karakuri as well as the climbing system, you can essentially grab onto anything, any sort of terrain in the environment. This is only limited by your stamina bar. You're just free to completely roam about. Beyond the different biomes, the different various locations and the various elevations and terrains and landmarks, which every single zone has plenty of these, visually very appealing, and I felt like these were great play spaces to spend time in. And besides hunting the bosses while you're in these zones, there's also various other things to see. There are small kimono, which you can farm for crafting and food materials. There are collectible resources that you just pick up by running by and spamming E. These include things like herbs, ores, flowers, and other plants. These will be used for, again, crafting items, but also food. There are collectibles, these things called Tsukumo, which every zone has 50 of these, but they act not only as a collectible for you to try to find all of them, but also this plays into the companion system for any solo players. When you're playing by yourself, one of these follows you around, and then as you collect more and more of them in the environment, this gives you a currency to upgrade your companion, essentially. Now, there is also a very large 5th zone in the game, although this unlocks after the campaign and is part of what we would consider the beginning of end game. But because this is pre-release coverage and the full review embargo isn't slated until launch day, they have asked us not to spoil this particular area of the game prior to release. But if I do any post-release coverage, we might show and talk about it then. But yes, even just the 4 base zones, which is where I've spent pretty much all of these 40 hours that I've played so far, they're very large, they're interesting, pretty diverse, and they've just been fun to spend time in, and they've been fun hunting grounds for doing the main thing of this game, which is going out on the boss hunts. Now, one of the more pleasant surprises that I also wasn't aware of until I started playing was the fact that Wild Hearts has base building. You are limited to a selection of structures in terms of what you can build. We're not talking like Minecraft to just do whatever you want, but you unlock more with time. And I think what's really neat about this is that you are allowed to build bases anywhere in any one of the zones. If you find a nice spot on a hill or in a particular building or in a crater or on top of a mountain, wherever, pretty much anywhere that has some flat terrain, you can start putting buildings down and make it a home. The things that you can build include the hunter's tent. This essentially acts as a respawn location, but also how you're able to fast travel. Then there's the campfire, which is where you go to select a mission or go out on a particular hunt. It's also where you go to upgrade your companion and then to matchmake into online play. You can also place down various crafting stations, such as the blacksmith, which is where you go to make weapons and armor, but also to swap out the gear that you're wearing. And then there are food-related stations like the drying rack, the pickle jar, and the fermenting cask. This will take the raw resources that you collect off of animals and plants in the environment and then turn them into more enhanced versions, better foods that give you better buffs. There are hunting towers. These are essentially radars that will display the boss locations of any boss within a set vicinity. And then there are various like cosmetic items, things like lights and lanterns, wind chimes, benches, and desks, just for a little bit of environmental RP setting. And there's many more than this. That list is actually only a fraction of the various things that you can build in a base. And again, you can do this anywhere on the map, and probably the biggest benefit is the fact that you can place down the hunter's tents wherever you want. This lets you pick your respawn and your teleportation points, which is really great for when you're hunting bosses, because in the middle of a hunt, when the boss changes, moves into another spot, just like it does in Monster Hunter, it does it in this game as well. So when a boss changes locations, you hit map, you pick a tent that you placed wherever you felt like, and you instantly teleport to it. It's just a really, really nice benefit, and it's just one of the many things that Wild Hearts does that makes moving through the world feel so good. Not only is there a lot of different options with the Karakuri when you're physically walking with your character, but the fact that you can just instantly teleport to cut a boss off who's retreating or to go where you think they might be going next, it makes the hunts feel that much more rewarding. Now, there are restrictions though, mainly through this resource system called the Dragon Pit capacity. So every single zone has a set number of what are called dragon pits. These are like these glowing wells that you will find in the world. The first time you have to interact with them directly, and then doing so will actually increase your maximum capacity for this combination of these 5 different elements. So every base related structure that you build, these dragon karakuri as they're called, each of them will cost a specific amount of one of the elemental resources. So for example, if you want to place down a hunter's tent, that is going to cost you 50 earth. Now, if you don't have enough, what you're going to have to do is go unlock more dragon pits in the zone, or alternatively, once a pit is unlocked, they can be then upgraded, which further increases your overall capacity in that zone. Now I want to briefly touch on crafting. You pretty much know what to expect from this system, but there are a few nuances I want to let you know of. Killing a boss or any new boss variant is going to automatically unlock a specific armor and weapon set tied to that boss. So you will take the boss parts that drop off that boss, plus any of the other additional resources that they may ask for. You take those and you make the gear. So there's 2 types of gear you're going to craft: weapons and armor. First up is weapons. You start off by crafting a base version of one of the 8 weapon types in the game. So in my example, I was crafting a lot of Nodachis. I actually have several of these, and that is because from that base version, you will then progress down this path towards your weapon of choice. So this isn't a skill tree, it is actually more of a progression path toward whatever newest weapon you've unlocked that you want to make. So basically what this does is it gives you options of taking different potential paths to reach a certain weapon, which in turn lets you select from different inherited skills based on the path that you took. And that's because every time you craft a new weapon in the chain, you're able to pull from these inherited skills from the prior versions. And in practicality, what this has done for me, for example, as I'm using the Nodachi and I'm sticking with that weapon, is that I have crafted like 5 or 6 different Nodachis depending on the final version of the weapon that I want. So for example, if I want a fire Nodachi, then I start at the base and then I work my way down a particular path until I get the fire one. And then if I want a water Nodachi, so on and so on. Outside of weapons, there is the armor. Now this is more straightforward. It has nothing to do with the branching path of the weapon construction. You just kill a boss, it will unlock the set, and then you farm the parts you need to craft that set. One interesting twist with armor though is this system of affinities, where depending on the gear that you've got equipped, you're gonna fall somewhere along this human and kimono path. Kind of like a morality system, if you will. Different pieces will push you more or less in one of these directions, and then there are certain perks on various weapons and gear pieces that will only be active if you meet the path requirements. So I might have a sword that has a damage dealing perk that requires me to be pure kimono, and to be pure kimono, I need to put on gear pieces that push me along that pure kimono path. The other form of gear that comes in this game comes from this talisman system. These have a chance to drop off of bosses. You can also engage with bosses in a certain way, kind of poking at certain weak points to give you a better chance of getting a talisman. And they just come with various perks to your offensive, defensive, and utility capabilities. And then one other thing I do want to mention here before we wrap up is that the game does have this main town. Unfortunately, it does appear to not really be a social hub unless you are grouped up with people. It doesn't look like you're going to be seeing a ton of randoms walking around in this town. It's really heavily tied to the narrative. This is where the NPCs are located, but a lot of these NPCs have gameplay functionality to them as well. So there's a blacksmith where you can go to craft weapons, armor, and change your equipment. There is someone who will allow you to make ornaments, which are just cosmetic pieces for your gear. There's a vendor to buy and sell items from. There's this fisherman's guild, which are essentially side quests that you'll get. There's also a vendor who has this ranking system, which will unlock emblems depending on how far in the game you've progressed. And then finally, there's a vendor for the bathhouse where you can go to get permanent health boost for your character. I gotta say, I am just overwhelmingly pleasantly surprised with Wild Hearts. I really wasn't sure what to think. When I first saw it, my immediate reaction was, is this just gonna be like a cheap knockoff of Monster Hunter? And it certainly is a monster hunting game, but like I said at the top, although it might feel a little less polished, not quite as fully realized, it doesn't quite have the level of depth in the world building, in the environment, in the characters, in the systems. It doesn't quite have the level of depth, but it has enough of its own unique things. The unique boss fights, the unique weapons, but the Karakuri, I'm telling you, it sells it. And the fact that these open world zones are way bigger than I expected them to be with all of these traversal elements, it checks enough boxes that it's been a thoroughly enjoyable experience. I have loved the 40 hours that I've played. And like I said, I pretty much have just gotten started because I've just unlocked the end game kind of versions of the bosses. I haven't even made much purple weapons. There's still a deep roster of purple weapons as well as a yellow tier of weapons. And there's tons of monster armor sets that I haven't completely crafted yet as well. So it's crazy. There's a lot of game here. If you like monster hunting games, this absolutely seems like a good one. Again, I don't think it's going to replace Monster Hunter, but boy, is it a pretty fantastic alternative. I've really enjoyed the game. You might see some more videos from me on it because I've had such a good time. But that does it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed this recap and general overview and impressions. And I'll see you in the next one, all right? Take it easy.